Hey guys, welcome to CraterMania. I'm your host, the man they call Crater, and I'd like to welcome you all back to my 500 Movies in 2025 series. And this is the very last episode of the Halloween Hoedown here in 2025. And it is the 5th of November. So remember the 5th of November, for it is the last episode of Halloween Hoedown outside of October, where, and the Halloween Hoedown this year, like I said, I was just celebrating, the spirit of Halloween. All these different movies, based around the holiday of Halloween and just the whole season of Halloween. Um, and that was all October long, and obviously, a few days into November as well. So just thank you guys, everybody that's been following the channel, and just this journey so far throughout this year, for being so patient with me. Um, so I'm about to hit 400 movies, guys, and like I set that goal for myself for this year for 500 movies in 2025. I'm still fighting to get there, hoping I will. Have faith in myself that I will. Like I said, I'm about to hit 400, so I have all the rest of this month and then all of next month. So I mean, I'm looking at like 100 movies, guys. I'm gonna try my best. I think I've done it in the past earlier this year. I what there was I can't remember what months they were, but like I did watch 100 movies in 2 months. So I think it's very possible. I just kind of got to get on the ball. I had a lot of stuff going on here lately, to be honest with you guys. Um, Stuff with my job, just stuff with life in general. It's just kind of been like, just kind of made me procrastinate a lot as far as like getting this stuff done here with the channel. But I gotta just say, even though I love doing this and I've set this goal for myself, this is not the most important thing for me in life. While movies are important to me, there's a lot of things that goes on with me on the outside of the channel, my work and just things like that. Um, that sometimes that stuff comes first, because life comes first sometimes, and well, all the time actually. But um but like I said, I'm trying to like kind of keep a clear mind and just kind of to focus on this on the channel as much as I can, and just get to these 500 movies in 2025. But and I feel like I'm going to get there. I just got to work hard for the next all the rest of this month and all of next month, and we'll see what happens, I guess. But I guess let's just go ahead and jump into tonight's episode. Like I said, this is the final episode of the Halloween Hoedown, and I've had so much fun just covering all these movies, these Halloween-based movies, and for these last three movies I want to talk about tonight. So they all kind of have uh, something in common, and that's within the titles themselves. So for tonight, we're going to be talking about Trick or Treats from 1982, which is a movie I've never watched before. I'm going to be talking about Trick or Treat from 1986, which just got a spectacular 4K release not too long ago from Synapse Films, and one of the greatest heavy metal movies of all time. And then we're going to be talking about Trick or Treat from 2007, the anthology horror film, which is one of my absolute favorite anthology horror films. So, like I said, I thought that would be a good way to just end the whole Halloween Hoedown event that I was doing with all the Halloween based movies, especially just ending with I think, what is one of the greatest horror anthology films of all time, and that being Trick or Treat. So, let's just go and jump right into those movies, guys. So, like I said, this first movie, Trick or Treats from 1982. This is a movie that I had never seen before, and you guys know, I'm a huge horror enthusiast, horror fan, and you guys know that I love all these films based around Halloween. So like I'm always just trying to find these movies that I've never watched before, that's whether in the horror genre or if it's based around the season of Halloween. So I'm always just trying to find new movies, ones that I've sometimes heard of but not actually watched before. But this is one of them, and beyond like those hallowed halls of like Haddonfield and these other Halloween based movies that I've watched in the past few weeks. There's always these kind of this landscape, of these lesser known titles from the 80s and all the different eras of film. So it was with this kind of spirit of discovery. Like I've always known of this film. I've always seen like the poster for it, and I've seen it like I've seen a few people talk about it on YouTube and stuff in the past. So like I said, I sat down for my first ever viewing of Trick or Treats from 1982, and this is a film like where the title promises kind of like these you know, like Halloween type thrills, but the reputation of this film kind of remains shrouded in kind of obscurity. Because, like I said, while I have heard some people talk about this movie, I've not heard a lot of people talk about this movie. But what I found in this movie was not really like a forgotten slasher or not a masterpiece by any means, but nor is it even an unwatchable disaster. But it's really this kind of curious, tonally dissonant, like, and ultimately like fascinating, I think, cinematic oddity that really just kind of defies any kind of categorization. Um, so this movie is just a film that is kind of built on that simple kind of classic slasher premise, and it was written and directed and shot and edited by Gary Graver. So Gary Graver is kind of this very prolific journeyman filmmaker, and this his story here begins with this very rather unsettling domestic scene. So Malcolm O'Keefe, who's played by Peter Jason, is he's committed to this mental institution on behalf of his wife Joan, played by Carrie Snodgrass. And the whole sequence is just kind of very jarring, and it's very um extended out. And it just really kind of establishes Malcolm as this victim of betrayal. It's a man whose sanity is secondary to his wife's desire to be rid of him. um so flash forward several years to Halloween night, and Joan, who is now remarried to this magician named Richard, who's which is in this brief cameo from David Carradine, the legendary David Carradine, and they're heading to this gig in Las Vegas. So this leaves her son Christopher, who's played by the director as son Chris Graver. So Christopher is, in the care of this teenage babysitter, which it's supposed to be a teenage babysitter, but this lady does not look like a teenager. Me and my wife Candace was watching this, and she was like, "Is this lady supposed to be a teenager?" I was like, "I guess," but this teenage babysitter Linda is played by Jacqueline Garou, and so after years of this kind of simmering rage, beyond all that the stuff with Christopher and Linda, there is Malcolm, who he stages this escape from this asylum, and his mind is set on just one thing, and that's returning home and confronting the woman who had locked him away. Um, Now, what follows all this is this kind of unconventional, slow burn that kind of prioritizes, character, quirk, and just an atmosphere over, conventional scares or whatever. Um, so the bulk of the film is not like a cat and mouse, game between a killer and a final girl or anything, but really most of the film is just this kind of battle of wills between Linda and Christopher, who is obsessed with pranks and magic tricks. And this boy is just a relentless age of he's at a relentless age of just creating chaos, and just So he deploys like this fake guillotine, the smoke bombs, and a joy buzzer, and all these different pranks. I mean, like fake drowning in the pool, and just all these kind of extended, focus on Christopher's pranks. It just creates this kind of strange, almost kind of comedic, rhythm that just constantly, defers that expected horror that's to come later in the film. And Linda, for her part, cycles through all this annoyance with Christopher and frustration and just, but later in the film, this eventual fear that comes over when Malcolm comes into the picture. But her primary un- antagonist, I guess you could say, for much of the film is a child, and not that this escaped lunatic. But when Malcolm does finally arrive at the house, the film kind of shifts gears, but not in the way that one would expect. But his presence is this initially he's kind of stealthy, he's kind of lurking around the house or whatever, and it leads to the film's kind of one true slasher moment, and just that mistaken identity murder of Linda's friend Andrea. And from the climax unfolds as this series of just drawn out sequences through the house and through the yard, and Malcolm is less this monstrous force like Michael Myers or somebody, but more this kind of disoriented, like vengeful man. And the final confrontation sees Linda, in this kind of moment of just desperate ingenuity, rigging Christopher's toy guillotine to be this lethal weapon. And just it fatally wounds Malcolm. So the film, it saves its most powerful shock, I think, for the very last frame of this film, as Linda stumbles downstairs to call the police. The camera lingers on Christopher, and you sense like something's going on with him. And he picks up his father's knife and just advances onto this unsuspecting Linda, the babysitter. And so the film freeze frames on his face, just suggesting that cycle of violence is not over, but it's just now been passed on to a new generation. Um, so let's discuss this film and just the what legacy it has, and the impact that it has brought on to um, us as fans. So to just kind of discuss that is to kind of discuss its profound lack of one, I guess I should say. So there were unlike its contemporaries like Halloween 2 or Friday the 13th Part 3, which were also released in the same year, 1982. Gary Graver's film did not spawn a franchise, unfortunately. It didn't inspire, legions of imitators or find a place in, even mainstream horror. It remains this kind of deep cut obscurity, honestly, from what I can see. I mean, like, this is my first time watching this film, but I can just see that it really has this very, very obscure feeling about it, obscure vibe. And I think it's really only known primarily to a lot of dedicated slasher completists out there, and then just fans of a lot of these curious movies that are out there. um but the reasons for this are kind of embedded in that very fabric of the film itself. I mean, first and foremost, it's has this very severe, like, tonal inconsistency. It was marketed as a slasher from what I can see. And it fails to deliver a high body count or any creative kills. um and just any kind of relentless suspense that audiences of that era craved. And the film spends kind of this huge amount of time on Christopher's pranks and just almost kind of like subplot, involving Joan and Richard's, magic act out in Vegas. So these kind of comedic and dramatic elements just clash very awkwardly, with that kind of grim premise of, this vengeful madman, which is kind of overlooked for most of the film. So viewers are just waiting for this kind of traditional slasher film to kick off, and they're likely, honestly, to be more bored if that's going to be waiting. If that's what they're wanting and that's what they're waiting for, and so it's really just up until the very end of the film before the only real murder occurs. But secondly, the pacing for this film is is really like really weird. So Gary Graver, he performed nearly every key creative role. He crafts this film that just feels deliberate at to a fault. So that long kind of meandering scenes of like Linda trying to manage Christopher, or Malcolm wandering through his old belongings in the shed, just it does little to build tension, so, and while this kind of slow burn approach could work in a different context, here it just feels kind of unfocused and just really drains, the whole Halloween night setting of any kind of potential energy and dread. You know what I mean? Like, but the casting of a lot of these actors that are shown in the film, even though it is very brief, like David Carradine or Steve Railsback, uh, they just feel like kind of these classic, B movie bait and switch. You know what I mean? Like their screen time is minimal, and their performances just feel disconnected from just that the central babysitter in peril plot line. Um, and just their presence really lends that film a kind of this bit of legitimacy to that the script and the execution, um, you know that simply cannot support. And just I think that's a common tactic, in low budget filmmaking to kind of secure, funding and distribution. But ultimately, Trick or Treats was a small fish in a very large pond, I guess you could say. So 1982 was just a landmark year for the genre of horror, both in classics like The Thing and Poltergeist and Creepshow. And against such, huge competition like that, this very quirky, slow paced, and tonally confusing film like Trick or Treat stood little chance of making a lasting impression, unfortunately. You know, but its impact, therefore, is not found in its influence on other films, but in its existence as this kind of fascinating artifact, almost, just like a time capsule, of the slasher boom's kind of outer fringes, where filmmakers tried to replicate this successful formula, but ended up creating something uniquely strange in the process, if that makes sense. But I guess in conclusion, like I said, as a first time watch of this film, and as a Halloween horror fan, my final impression of Trick or Treats is one of just I'm kind of on the fence with it. It's not a good film by conventional standards. um its pacing is very strange, like I said. And the tone is kind of like this. It's all over the place as well. I mean, it really has this potential, though, for genuine terror, but it's just that's largely squandered by so many, like, the subplots going on. But yeah, it is far from being worthless or anything. So, I think that the film's commitment to that kind of strange rhythm, and then you have this kind of unsettling performance of this young Christopher and very very creepy kid. It just and just with that ending, it's genuinely shocking. And just I actually love that freeze frame final shot. So so it's definitely with that. I mean, I don't think that this is a forgettable film. Would this be something I would watch again? I don't know. I had to think about it. But like I said, it's not a film for the casual horror fan, seeking, a spooky seasonal thrill or anything. It is, however, just I think this very interesting watch for that type of person who's that cinematic archaeologist who someone like me who's always digging for these new films that they've heard about, they know about, but they've never seen. And just I think that the people that would watch this that are interested in like that whole formula and the DNA of the slasher genre, um, and just strange things that would occur during that whole heyday, it really stands as a testament to kind of that singular vision of this guy, Gary Graver. And it really serves as kind of this peculiar off kilter entry in that whole canon of Halloween horror. Um, it may not be something that you would actively seek out for a lot of people out there, but I just think finding this movie as this kind of unexpected offering, that would be found like at the bottom of the barrel or whatever, it really does provide like this kind of strange and memorable flavor, all its own. So I would say at least check this movie out. It's on YouTube for free, the full movie. That's where I watched it. So I mean, if you guys are interested, definitely go check it out on YouTube. It's also out on like physical media as well. But I mean, like, I would test this movie out yet before you if go and buy this on physical media. But yeah, so moving on to the next movie. So this next movie, like I absolutely love this movie. Like I just mentioned earlier, this movie came out earlier, not too long ago, on 4K for the first time. I mean, and Blu-ray. I mean, so this movie had never been the only thing it had been released on. Actually, I have the DVD right here. So this was the other than the VHS and I think maybe like beta or something like that. This was the only like modern physical release of this movie, Trick or Treat from 1986, and those images of Ozzy Osbourne and Gene Simmons on there are not what they actually look like in the film. So if you look on the back, you can actually see Gene Simmons there. So that's what he actually looks like in the film. But yeah, this was the only release, physical release for the longest time, for many, many years. And it never got released on Blu-ray. But then, like I said, Synapse Films released Trick or Treat, all these different special editions so they did Blu-ray, they did 4K. So Blu-ray and 4K came out at the same exact time for this movie. And so it's somewhere on my shelf over here, or I would get it and show that one to you guys as well. But like, Synapse Films, Michael Felsher, everyone involved did such a fantastic job on that release. One of the best like horror 4K releases that I have seen, in my opinion. Like I said, I love this movie, and again, as a just a seasoned horror fan, and just also just a lifelong fan of heavy metal, just discovering these movies like Trick or Treat that just kind of perfectly marry these two passions of mine, is just to it's like it almost remains like a priceless artifact, if that makes sense. So Trick or Treat is, this 1986 supernatural slasher directed by Charles Martin Smith. And it isn't just a film that ticks those boxes, you know what I mean? It's this glorious, just headbanging testament to that raw, rebellious power of rock and roll and heavy metal, that's just unleashed upon the unsuspecting. And this is not just a movie for me, it is an experience. It's just kind of ritualistic summoning that of all that is just dark and defiant and just undeniably fucking cool, and it's all wrapped in this Halloween kind of themed package that just continues to resonate with a very dedicated cult following. I mean, there are so many people that I know that love this movie. And just to see, in those opening, segments when we're in Eddie's room and you see like the posters of Judas Priest and Anthrax and Kiss and Wasp and all these awesome metal bands from that era, you know. So to truly appreciate this movie, we first gotta kind of delve into that electrifying, devil may care premise. So this movie was set against, the backdrop of the whole Reagan era, American high school, and just the film introduces us to Eddie, also known as Ragman. So Eddie Weinbauer, and he's played by Mark Price, who you may know as Skippy from what was that show called again? Uh, Fuck, I forgot. Like it's the show with Michael J. Fox. Anyway, so he played Skippy on this old '80s show that I can't not remember the name of right now. Um, but and but Eddie is this kind of deeply unpopular teenager whose solace kind of lies in or not in like the jock camaraderie or any kind of academic pursuits, but his life more is involved with like the kind of thunderous riffs and those guttural growls of his idol, which is the legendary heavy metal icon, that's well fictional heavy metal icon, Sammy Kerr. And Sammy Kerr is this very notorious, Lake Ridge High alumnus, and he was infamous for his rebellious like stage antics, as he was for his electrifying music, and his career is just ultimately cut short by this kind of mysterious and untimely death in this hotel fire. So for Eddie, this loss is a huge gut punch to him. Just a devastating blow to his already kind of precarious existence. And his only recourse is his friend Nuke, who is played by Gene Simmons. And Nuke is this radio DJ and a former associate of Sammy Kerr's. So Nuke, understanding the kind of that void left in Eddie's life, he bestows upon him the ultimate gift, and that's the last like release. It's a demo, a vinyl record of Sammy Kerr's final unreleased album, Songs in the Key of Death. And this isn't just a record. It's like I said, it's Sammy's last testament. This kind of sonic artifact, that's destined for this midnight Halloween broadcast, as per Sammy Kerr's will. But for Eddie, this vinyl becomes something far more profound, almost like a conduit to his deceased hero. Um, so back in the kind of the sanctuary of Eddie's bedroom, this kind of real ritualistic act of reverse playback and just a practice that's familiar to any self-respecting metalhead of that era. It unlocks this hidden dimension. So in Sammy Kerr's disembodied voice, just laced with that same venom and charisma that he possessed in life, speaks directly to Eddie, and this kind of paranormal communion begins with Sammy offering revenge against Eddie's tormentors and just the bullies at school, and just and who's led by this the very stereotypical jock, Tim Haney. And initially Sammy's kind of interventions are almost playful, kind of empowering Eddie and just boosting his confidence, and he almost is seen as like a dark fairy godmother or something of this kind of adolescent rage. But however, that whole benevolent spirit soon begins to twist, and his thirst for vengeance, escalates from these petty pranks to these kind of life threatening, attacks. And when Sammy, sets his eyes on Leslie Graham, who is, the object of Eddie's affections, Eddie realizes that he has unleashed this force that he can no longer control. And his attempt to just destroy this record is met with Sammy's kind of burgeoning power, and just this ghost or demon or whatever you want to call him now at this point, who is just kind of fueled by this ambient sound and this electrical energy. He just manifests physically this kind of towering inferno of just rock and roll fury. um and the film's narrative, it escalates into this kind of full blown supernatural showdown. And Eddie, with the help of his friend Roger, they race against time to retrieve and destroy this cassette copy of the songs in the Key of Death, which is the only other physical copy of Sammy's kind of ghostly presence. And Roger's skepticism, leads him to play the tape, unleashing Sammy, upon, the school's Halloween dance, which is, an event that just becomes this kind of chaotic altar for Sammy Kerr's vengeful resurrection. And the live band that is there with Sammy, who, and they mistake him for his impersonator, though they he just proceeds to obliterate the audience with these bolts of electricity fired from his guitar. And just that whole climactic battle, unfolds as Eddie and Leslie, they find themselves in the crosshairs, and they're just kind of navigating this labyrinth of a school now, and just overrun by this vengeful rock god whose very essence is just tied to his music. And the final confrontation, which is set against this whole backdrop of this radio station, and this bridge, it sees Eddie using his knowledge of Sammy's kind of amplified existence to lure him into this, down into the water, and so which would ultimately be Sammy's demise. And so the last bits of his music were destroyed by Eddie and Leslie. So the casting of Trick or Treat is nothing short, I think, of inspired, and just a really a significant part, of its enduring charm for both, for fans of both genres of heavy metal, of horror. And Mark Price, like I said, while perhaps not the most imposing of horror, heroes out there, he really perfectly embodies, that awkward, alienated teen, who finds his voice through just the rebellion of metal. And Tony Fields, his portrayal of Sammy Kerr is absolutely electric. I mean, it is awesome. He kind of captures that swagger, that menace, and just that sheer, rock star magnetism that really made the character so compelling. And just his physical transformation as into this like ghostly, spectral entity, um is really just as chilling as it is spectacular. But the real magic, however, lies in some of these special appearances in the film. So you have Gene Simmons, like I said, he plays the very gruff, but ultimately helpful Nuke. And he just really delivers this performance that is equal parts iconic rock star and this kind of grizzled, radio personality, which I think, like Gene Simmons had said, that he was inspired by radio personality Wolfman Jack, who he listened to growing up. So I think that's what the part he was trying to play here. But his presence alone kind of lends that film this kind of undeniable coolness. Because, and maybe that's me being biased, because I know a lot of people don't like Gene Simmons, but I love Kiss. Kiss is my favorite band of all time. And so it's just really cool to see Gene in this. And but then there is Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness himself. Rest in peace. And he plays Reverend Aaron Gilstrom, who's this televangelist, spewing kind of like against these supposed evils of like heavy metal or whatever. And it's a very short, brief cameo, and just Ozzy's cameo with that is just kind of this brilliant meta commentary, just a very tongue in cheek nod to just the whole moral panic surrounding the genre that he helped define. I think it's a performance that, while brief, is very utterly memorable, and it just adds another layer of that kind of nostalgic sweetness for metal fans out there. But beyond the main cast, the supporting details are equally noteworthy as well. So there is an uncredited cameo of Kevin Yeager as the lead singer of the Kickers, which is the band at the Halloween dance. And it's a kind of fun bit of the kind of insider stuff for those who recognize his significant contributions to the film's special effects, and all these other horror films that Kevin Yeager has worked on, which is, and the effects within Trick or Treat was just genuinely impressive for their time. And if you know Kevin Yeager's work, you can easily identify, especially, in the scarrings and everything on the makeup effects that Sammy Kerr wears in the film. And another interesting thing about this film, so the near casting of Eddie Weinbauer almost went to Keanu Reeves. And that really adds another layer of what if to the film's history. While Gene Simmons' original offer was to play Sammy Kerr, and his eventual decision to play Nuke, embodying his childhood hero, Wolfman Jack, it speaks to that kind of intriguing behind the scenes things that go on sometimes, that really surround these cult classics. And just the very title, of Sammy's album, Songs in the Key of Death, is very clever, almost, I believe that they took the title from Stevie Wonder's Songs in the Key of Life. So I think that was kind of a subtle, wink to music lovers out there. But the musical backbone, I think, of Sammy's Resurrection is provided by this band called Fastway. So all these songs in the movie, from Sammy Kerr are by this band called Fastway, and just their heavy riffs and just the kind of driving rhythms are just really that perfect sonic fuel for Sammy Kerr. And you have Christopher Young's score, it just masterfully blends this atmospheric dread with the kind of raw energy, of the metal soundtrack. So, I mean, this movie is so amazing. And just the legacy and the impact of it is absolutely undeniable, just particularly within, it's like subcultures that it's so, kind of it vibrantly depicts throughout the film. Now, while it may have, received kind of like reviews, upon its initial release, its embrace of the then controversial, heavy metal aesthetic, kind of married with this classic supernatural horror story. It really just struck a chord, with this whole generation of just alienated youth. And just the film really taps into this very essence of what made heavy metal so appealing to its fans, just that sense of rebellion and empowerment, and just that kind of cathartic release of just that raw emotion. And Sammy Kerr, just becomes this kind of symbol of that misunderstood artist, just that outcast who fights back. And this really resonates so strongly that the film is often cited as this significant influence for characters like Eddie Munson in Stranger Things. And the whole satanic panic that really gripped society in the 80s with with heavy metal, often demonized and all that, is directly addressed here and subverted by the film. And it really turns that the very music that was feared into this tool of just supernatural vengeance. So this is deliberate blurring of lines and just the embrace of the controversial is really what solidified its cult status. It's a film that understands its audience, and it really celebrates their passions, rather than scorning them. So, and that's what I love so much about this. But in conclusion, Trick or Treat is to me a cinematic masterpiece for those who bleed black and love the thrill of a good scare. It's more than just a slasher film. It's a love letter to heavy metal and just a celebration of Halloween's dark spirit, and just a testament to that power of music that to transcend even death. And the film is just a perfect synergy of genre elements. It offers this very relentless pace to it. Memorable performances, a killer soundtrack, and just a darkly cathartic, narrative. It's a film that, much like Sammy Kerr himself, it refuses to be silenced. And for any horror fan who's ever felt like an outsider, for any metal fan that's ever felt like an outsider, or you felt misunderstood, Trick or Treat is your anthem of a film. It is your primal scream, your ultimate Halloween horror heavy metal experience. It's a film that demands to be seen, to be heard, and cranked all the way to fucking 11. So break out your corpse paint, raise your horns, and let the spectral fury of Sammy Kerr wash over you. You won't regret it. So check out Trick or Treat. Like I said, it's out there for you guys online. I'm sure if you have the Screenbox app, I think is what it's on. It's on there for streaming, but I highly, highly recommend picking this release up on 4K through Synapse Films. Uh, Literally, in my opinion, one of the greatest horror 4Ks releases that there's ever been. So yeah, so that brings me to the last film that we're talking about tonight, and the last film is part of the Halloween Hoedown here on CraterMania's 500 Movies in 2025. Like I said earlier, to me, this is one of the greatest horror movie anthology films of all time. And as you guys know from the past here on the channel, I'm a devout fan of the horror anthology genre, and just and just to add on to that, I'm someone who just practically lives and breathes for all things Halloween. And Trick or Treat from 2007 is, it's an institution when it comes to all that. It's just that cinematic equivalent, of that perfectly carved pumpkin, that the crisp autumn air, just that thrill of a genuinely spooky story, shared, on a Halloween night. So this was released, to this kind of staggered, reception, and this at a delayed home video debut. So Michael Daughtry, this was his directorial masterpiece, and it has since ascended to just this world of cult classics, and for good reason. I mean, this isn't just a collection of horror vignettes or anything. It's a love letter to Halloween itself. Just this kind of very well crafted, tapestry, just woven with dark humor and genuine scares, and just kind of this unwavering respect for the holidays, lore. And what Trick or Treat, it unfolds this kind of symphony of just these kind of intertwined narratives. So it's all set, on just these hallowed grounds of Warren Valley, Ohio, on All Hallows Eve. And the film's genius lies, in this kind of nonlinear structure, this almost like a narrative jigsaw puzzle that just gradually, kind of reveals its interconnected pieces. And I absolutely love when films do that. So at the heart of this kind of intricate design is Sam, who is this character who is as charmingly terrifying as he is fundamentally integral to the film's thematic core. Um, so he's wearing this burlap sack over his head, and a pair of these orange footy pajamas, and Sam is more than just a spooky trick or treater. He is the embodiment of Halloween's ancient spirit, this kind of vigilant enforcer of its rules and traditions. And, when these sacred customs are violated, Sam appears, not as this kind of harbinger of random violence, but as this kind of consequence, just like a cosmic balance adjuster for those who have disrespected this night of Halloween. So the film, like I said, it masterfully weaves together these four um, ultimately connected, storylines, and each offering this kind of a unique flavor of Halloween horror. So the opening of this film with it it begins with these characters with this girl named Emma and her loving husband Henry. And while Henry, you can tell he revels in the whole festive spirit of Halloween, Emma kind of has this disdain for Halloween. And so she ends up committing this cardinal sin, and she blows out their jack o' lantern before midnight. And this seemingly minor, transgression unlocks this night of terror. And as Henry sleeps, Emma begins, dismantling all these decorations, and this is just this symbolic act of defiance against the holiday's magic. So she's then brutally murdered by this unseen assailant, and her mutilated corpse is later discovered by Henry, and displayed, kind of amongst his all his precious Halloween decorations. So this opening really sets this very chilling tone and just immediately establishes, the film's commitment to this, these established rules and these dire consequences if you break them. So this brings us to the next part of the film with the principal, Stephen Wilkins, and this sinister secret that he has. So this segment introduces us, like I said, to Stephen Wilkins, who is this seemingly, upstanding principal of Warren Valley Elementary. And he encounters Charlie, which you may remember as the kid from Bad Santa. And Charlie is this overweight, delinquent who has just been, vandalizing, jack-o'-lanterns and stealing all this candy. And so Principal Wilkins, he lectures Charlie on just the importance of Halloween traditions, only to reveal as Charlie vomits violently that the candy was laced with cyanide. So Stephen Wilkins' sinister secret is further revealed as he attempts to bury Charlie's body, alongside another victim in his backyard. And his efforts are kind of, thwarted by these trick or treaters, which is his own Halloween obsessed, son Billy, and then also there is the there's Mr. Krieg who lives next door. So the twist kind of deepens when Wilkins, discovers the other victim is still alive, whom he then murders to maintain his silence before burying both of them. And just the chilling climax of that segment sees Wilkins guiding his son Billy to carve a jack-o'-lantern down in the basement, which to our horror is revealed to be Charlie's severed head. And this story is just a masterclass, I think, in dark humor and that kind of escalating dread. And it really reveals that kind of monstrous hypocrisy that can lie, beneath just that veil of like respectability. You know what I mean? Um, but that leads me to the next segment in this film, which is possibly my favorite segment in the entire film, and that's the Halloween school bus massacre. So This story introduces, this group of teenagers, Macy, Chip, Schrader, and Sarah, who, along with this devout Halloween traditionalist Rhonda, they venture to this flooded quarry. And, Macy recounts just the chilling, urban legend of the Halloween school bus massacre, which years prior, the parents of these 8 mentally, handicapped children, bribed the bus driver to dispose of these kids. And the driver was supposedly like lost control, and but was one of the kids actually ends up like realizing like what's going on. He tries to get on the bus, and it makes the bus plummet down into the quarry, drowning all the children. And the driver, which is ends up being the sole survivor, he just vanished with his fate being unknown. And the legend states that no one ever found the bus because people didn't want it found, and so Macy's act of leaving these 8 jack-o'-lanterns by the lake in tribute is met with this cruel prank by the other teens. As so as they split up, Rhonda is pursued by these horrifying figures, which turn out to be the other teens in disguise. But their cruel trick takes this kind of horrifying turn when the actual drowned children from the school bus massacre have risen from the depths, and they're emerging from the lake to attack. And Rhonda, who is now was abandoned by her friends, and she's seeking revenge, she escapes and exchanging this kind of knowing nod with Sam as she pulls her wagon of jack-o'-lanterns and leaves the scene of the crime. So this story really taps into that kind of primal fears, of drowning and isolation, and just that those monstrous, consequences of cruelty. With Sam's, kind of silent acknowledgement, highlighting that shared understanding of just Halloween's true nature. Um, but that also now brings me to the next segment, which is the surprise party. So our our final like interconnected narrative focuses on Lori, who is this very shy 22-year-old virgin, visiting her sister Danielle and friends Maria and Janet. So while her friends embrace their dates and they're heading to this bonfire party, Lori, who is this very staunch Halloween enthusiast, prefers to go to the town festival. And in her traditional Little Red Riding Hood costume, she's wearing on later on the way, she's to join her friends. She's attacked by this man in this vampire costume. So she arrives, at the bonfire with this injured vampire who is revealed to be Stephen Wilkins from earlier in the film. And so the climax of this story is just really this breathtaking and horrifying reveal where these women under the full moon shed their human forms to become werewolves. And Lori, having chosen Wilkins as her first, whether that means first kill or well, they're implying that it's her first time she's having sex or whatever, but it's her actually just her first kill. So and it's like this metaphorical shedding of her virginity and innocence, and so she transforms and devours him. And Sam watches as the werewolves feast on these their unsuspecting dates. Um, but this segment I think, is just that powerful blend of just, transformation horror and that dark kind of twisted sexuality, and it culminates in this kind of shocking act of just that primal violence. And it's to the theme of Marilyn Manson's Sweet Dreams. So really, really cool segment. I really like that one a lot too. But then this brings me to Sam's story. So, and these are based off the rules, the ritual, and the revelation that we've talked about so far, and all the things that are very important to Sam. So the culmination of these stories, just it brings us back to that grumpy Mr. Krieg, who was the neighbor of Mr. Wilkins. Um, And as he continues to kind of resist Halloween, he's just increasingly terrorized by supernatural occurrences. So Sam eventually ambushes him, and in this struggle between them, Krieg unmasks this creature, revealing its jack o' lantern skull hybrid head. So Krieg shoots Sam, but the creature persists. So when Sam attempts to stab Krieg, he inadvertently hits a candy bar that has fallen into Krieg's lap. And in this kind of accidental exchange, Krieg treats Sam, just kind of fulfilling the Halloween ritual. And so Sam satisfied, he spares Krieg. And in this kind of devastating reveal, you see these photographs burning in Krieg's fireplace that of the school bus massacre kids, and it exposes Krieg as that missing bus driver from that school bus massacre. So this final act really brings the film full circle, and it demonstrates that every transgression has a consequence, and that Sam is that unwavering guardian of these Halloween laws and these rules. Um, but the legacy of Trick or Treat is, I think, one of like remarkable resilience and just enduring adoration. Um, Despite its kind of initial limited release and that baffling 2 year delay in getting it to audiences, the film has really cultivated a massive and just dedicated cult following. Um, and I think this success is not accidental. It stems from just the film's kind of deep seated, understanding and just celebration of Halloween. And Michael Dougherty, he doesn't just present scary stories. He imbues the film with just the very spirit of Halloween, with the costumes, the candy, the jack o' lanterns, the ancient folklore, just that inherent duality of the night, which is the joy and the terror. Um, and I think what Trick or Treat has become, is just this benchmark, for modern Halloween movies. It recaptured just that the anthology spirit that was just so prevalent in earlier decades with like Creep Show and Tales from the Dark Side, but it was infused it with this kind of contemporary, sensibility and this visual flair that is both nostalgic and fresh. Um, and the film's impact can be seen in how it has become this essential watch for horror fans every October, including myself. I absolutely love this. It's one of my favorite Halloween movies that there is. Um, it's the kind of movie that just inspires, a lot of repeat viewings where new details and connections emerge, with each immersion. And Sam in particular has just transcended the film to become this iconic horror figure. I mean, there are Sam costumes out there at Spirit Halloween. There are like collectibles, action figures, statues, bobbleheads. I mean, so much Trick or Treat merchandise has been made over the years now since its release back in 2007. And that character of Sam has just become instantly recognizable and endlessly cosplayed by so many fans out there. And furthermore, the film's success has just paved the way, for other horror anthologies, and it cemented just the idea that well crafted, and thematically cohesive horror can thrive, outside the mainstream, blockbuster model. It proved that audiences crave original storytelling that respects the genre and its traditions, while also offering, something genuinely new and exciting. And just the film's influence can be felt, in that resurgence of just interest in, the anthology formats, like I spoke of, and just a renewed appreciation for that artistry, involved in kind of weaving these multiple stories, these multiple narratives into kind of a cohesive whole. You know what I mean? Um, But in conclusion, I think Trick or Treat is more than just a horror movie. It's a love letter just to Halloween. And for fans of the genre and for fans of Halloween, it's an absolute must watch. Just a film that understands and articulates, just precisely what makes this night so special. Michael Dougherty has crafted this masterpiece that is just simultaneously, terrifying and hilarious and just deeply, deeply atmospheric. Um, just the interconnected stories, the unforgettable character of Sam, and just it really just reminds us that that masterful blend of folklore and fright really create this cinematic experience that is both deeply satisfying and just undeniably unique. It's a film that reminds us that the rules of Halloween are ancient and sacred, and those who dare to break them, you're doing so at their own peril. So Trick or Treat doesn't just entertain, it is Halloween captured on film. It's a timeless testament just to the enduring magic and that primal allure of the spookiest night of the year. And Halloween, can't wait to see you next year in 2026. My favorite holiday of the year, my favorite time of the year, unfortunately, is now over for 2025. And that is the end of the Halloween Hoedown here in 2025, here on CraterMania's 500 Movies in 2025. I really hope you guys enjoyed hearing me talk about these movies as much as I enjoyed talking about them and as much as I enjoyed watching all these films. But I got a lot more coming up, guys, over the next couple months to end out this year. Hope you guys have enjoyed everything I've done so far this year. I just appreciate all of you for checking out what you have here on the channel so far. I want to thank everyone who watched this video either live if you're watching on replay. Thank you guys so much for just even taking the time to watch this video. Please drop me a comment below on what your favorite of the three movies I talked about tonight, if you've seen any of them, or you could just let me know anything out there that you enjoy about the season of Halloween and the holiday of Halloween in general. I'd love to hear about it. I'd love to converse with you guys about it. But if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. I'd really appreciate that. It would mean a lot to me. And if you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button below to catch more videos from me like this one. And as always, click that bell for any future notifications. But with all that said, I'm Crater. This is CraterMania. I love you guys. Have a good night.